Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. But, the way time works around here, Dan, the annuals don't count. And that's my rule. There you go.
Have you seen the latest solicits, Mark? Not to be that guy, but we have an Amazing Spider-Man annual coming up, and we're getting a Spider-Man annual. So, it's like time is catching back up again in recent months. So double annuals in the same month. What are you going to do?
I look forward to working through my local comic book shop and subscribing to them as the separate series that they are, since they are not part of the main series. So there you go.
Well, my comic shop does the same. So, I may have to admit it. But either way, welcome everybody to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe, one annual at a time. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, and in some instances his past again and now his future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
Yeah, our podcast exists purely because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon, where all the episodes of our Season 6 are already going up several weeks early, and reviews of all these issues are up early as well. Plus, we've got a ton of interviews with some of our favorite Spider-Man creators coming in early. Today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 25. The 25 issues now are like big celebratory issues, but that won't stop them from doing a bunch of extra bonus-sized issues. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover pencils and interior pencils are by John Romita Jr. Inks are by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and the main flashback art at the heart of this issue is from Kaare Andrews. And of course, letters are by VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue also features a backup story entitled Welcome to Omaha, Spider-Man, with a story by Rainbow Rowell, art by Alvaro Lopez, and lettering again from VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue was first released on May 10th, 2023. Mark, hit me with that sweet, sweet recap.
Sweet, sweet recap indeed, Dan. Well, we open up back to the ending of Amazing Spider-Man number 22 with Peter getting pushed by MJ through a portal and Wyatt getting killed off. What happens next is MJ's story. Jung jung. So Paul finishes off Wyatt and lets MJ know she did the right thing, while Rabin feels a disturbance in the Force, and boy is he pissed. Like Anakin getting his lower half incinerated pissed. So Rabin wants the sacrifice of the Scarlet Woman, and since Wanda isn't around, MJ, you're up. One day later, Paul wants MJ to move from the room. Peter is gone. Paul gets slapped. MJ does a very Peter-esque pose on her knees holding a Spidey mask. 1 month later, MJ looks pretty well put together for being in a dystopian universe, and she and Paul are working through symbology. A symbol that looks like a 7 leads to MJ getting a distant look and calling it the jackpot. 3 months later, and the page with MJ looking like Sarah Connors that was spread all over Twitter a few weeks ago finally makes its real-time debut, while Paul seems to have been working out as well, so there must be a Planet Fitness in this dystopian timeline too. Paul finally convinces MJ to move on from the house after both get injured by Rabin. A week after that, Paul and MJ are marching through this dystopian hellscape, which leads MJ to quietly wonder, what's the holdup, Tiger? 3 months after that, Paul and MJ are going through canned goods, and MJ finds baby food, which leads to the next revelation, the children, Owen and Romy, who have been abandoned in another house. 1 week after that, Paul and MJ are pondering what happened to the parents of these two kids before Paul starts spouting off that their plan doesn't involve children. Where have I heard that before? That leads MJ to say she's not leaving without them, and Paul can go if he wants to. Paul is dismayed by MJ's dismissal and says he would never abandon the kids, and that's that. A month after that, MJ, Paul, and the two kids look like something out of a Graham Nash tune. Owen, who keeps talking about the Scribble Man, and then he asks for a hug, and MJ, she obliges. 3 months after that, MJ and Paul are testing out the symbology doohickey, and the two of them appear to have a silhouetted romantic meet-cute moment. Let's put a pin in this, because the key word here is appears. Now we're flash-forwarding seasons, and the family is doing family stuff. Paul and MJ are staring longingly at each other. The kids are calling her mommy. They're making pasta until another familiar voice starts talking about the return of the Sunblood. Ooh, yeah! And Rabin has brought his trusty blade of decay. Paul brings the kids to the safe room, and MJ readies the symbology blaster. Paul gets a shot in on Rabin before he gets injured, and MJ fires the symbology thingy, and it emits a blast of cotton candy. I mean, I think cotton candy is one of the most overrated fun foods too, so who am I to argue? Rabin is offended by such an offensive, and is just before he closes in on MJ and Paul, here comes the Sunblood, Peter Parker himself! Ooh, yeah! Anyway, we're reliving the final images of the last issue. Small voice, Rabin getting impaled, Peter getting cucked, yada, yada, yada. Which brings us back to the real world, and Peter and MJ looking super distant. MJ reminds Peter he was gone almost 4 years in her time. Peter asks her if Paul and her are an item, and she just mentions, me and Paul and Romy and Owen. Okay then. Peter talks about things that happened like they just happened yesterday, because they basically did, and MJ is all, I know, but the internet thinks you're a cuck, so I gotta stay with Paul, and the internet is never wrong. Peter leaves the hospital just as MJ gets a doctor talking about Paul having no records before conveniently trailing off. And Peter is greeted by the Fantastic Four, and boy are they pissed about the whole mini-fusion reactor incident. Fisticuffs ensue before Captain America intervenes, reminding everyone that all of this could have been avoided if Peter just asked nicely the first time around. And he's like, dude, my girlfriend just ditched me because I abandoned her for 4 years in her universe and you wanted me to wait longer? What kind of cuck do you take me for? I'm just going to keep working it in, Dan.
Third time's the charm.
I mean, the power of 3, right? Which brings us all the way back to a flashback sequence of Peter reliving the moments from the first few issues, including one where he seems to be taking a swing at Paul, when it was written the other way around in an earlier issue, and Rabin is awakened to kill off the Scarlet Woman. And this obviously means Mary Jane dies in issue number 26, because the internet continues to be right about every single thing that is happening in Amazing Spider-Man right now. So that is the end of our main story, Dan. How about I give you a quick summary of the backup?
It's a quick backup, so give me a quick summary.
I mean, it's a couple of pages, and in it, Peter and Felicia go to a wedding in Omaha, but Peter leaves the wedding to run down a thief in the middle of nowhere, a la The Commuter Cometh. He comes back looking like he took a dirt nap, and he misses the lance dance with Felicia, which is My Heart Will Go On, which would make him cry. And that is our backup tale of this double-sized issue. So there we are. Dan, lots to talk about in that backup, I'm sure, but maybe in the main story too.
Do you think, since we've been going with the Peter, Paul, and Mary Jane, musical thing, we're going to get a last dance with Mary Jane in the next issue, like just to keep the musical stuff going?
I mean, or maybe are they going to dance to like Puff the Magic Dragon or something? Or
I don't know. Hey, so there's a lot that happened in this issue, and we're going to do our best to kind of break it all down. But I thought we should start just by talking about like our overall thoughts and reactions to this issue. I got to read this almost a week early for reasons I won't get into, and so like I got to kind of like preempt what I thought the reaction would be, and so let's talk about our reactions, and then we can talk about how the internet responded to this issue as well. Just because I do think that the way that this has played out on the internet has seemingly surprised the people making it, as well as I think everybody who's been forced to engage on the contents of this issue. So, Mark, I haven't really talked to you much about this issue. In the week and a half since I read it, I sent a text to you saying like, oh boy, the internet's going to melt down on this one, but that I didn't really know how I felt about it. And I still think I don't really know how I feel about it. And I want to know if you have landed in any particular way.
Yeah, I mean, I am in a similar boat as you. I mean, not having as much of a lead time on it as you. I mean, I am, as you could probably tell from my recap, like immensely amused by just how wrong and when we say the internet, we mean a specific sect of Spider-Man fans online that are just tearing this run apart, and we know who they are. But the thing is, those people have been like just so consistently wrong about like objective facts that are happening in this comic, and like this is just, again, I mean, they're basing criticism based on speculation of what they think is going to happen, and then we get things that are revealed here that are they swerves, are they curves? I don't even know if you would call it that, because that's the thing. If like what I'm finding in this comic is, and I know you went back and read prior comics after reading this one, like everything actually checks out, and like there's a steady trail of breadcrumbs about what is actually happening here. If you don't just look at it and immediately leap to, I don't want to say the worst conclusion, because it's not about bad or good, but it's the conclusions that fans who want to feel like this total rage about this are leaping to. I think that's the bottom line here. But at the end of the day, where I'm struggling is, okay, like it's kind of the Schadenfreude in me is kind of laughing that these people are wrong, but like I don't know if this is actually enhancing my enjoyment of this storyline, like, because like there is a lot of intricacy here and a lot of like work and misdirect, and unlike the the infamous Tombstone swerve from earlier in this not this arc, but in this run, where I feel like, wow, I was like legitimately surprised in a really like, wow, comics can be fun kind of a way. I don't know if I'm having fun right now. I think that's the bottom line. Like I don't think this is a slog the way some of the stories from, let's say, the Nick Spencer run were towards the end. But this is requiring a lot of work and like a lot of like, wait, my brain is not allowed to go in the direction it wants to go because those facts don't actually add up in that direction, and now I have to like, it's kind of like prolonging. I know we're saying like, oh well, now we know the mystery box is done, but that's the thing, it's not still in my mind, because I feel like there's still pieces left to be out there that's going to tie everything together in this next issue, but I don't know if that's necessarily makes it enjoyable or not. Does that make sense? Am I babbling, or am I making some sense here?
Totally, you make sense, and I feel the same way in that, like, I don't know what to grab onto as solid fact here.
Yeah.
Reading through, like, knowing ostensibly the mystery box having been revealed. What did Peter do? Like, I think everything involving our main character has been followed through pretty clearly. There's maybe one moment in this that's not super clear, which we'll talk about. But like on Peter's behalf, like the character arc here makes total sense, and we watch it come to like its inevitable conclusion in this story, which would then set up where we found him back at the start. So I have found a really solid enjoyment going back to issue 1 and rereading it through for all the pieces that involve this particular storyline. It all lines up fairly well. And yet I'm asking myself, is that it? Like, is that all there is here? Like, because if that's the case, where we end up at the end of this issue is not really all that stunning. It is exactly as presented back in issue 1. It's just, I think the bigger thing is like the meta commentary on this, which is like, holy crap, are they actually doing this? Like, are they really moving MJ on from Peter and how do I feel about that? And I'm asking
Right.
myself questions like, and we'll talk about this, like, but is this the most satisfying way to do that? And I don't feel like I can answer that question yet because it all kind of lays on the next issue,
Yeah.
and that's not to punt. It's just, you're right. I think there are key parts of this comic that maybe I'm overreading it, but really seem to be continuing to tell us that we don't know everything yet, And in my reread, that was even further emphasized for me, is that there's something else going on here. Whether I'm going to like that or not, I don't know. And whether I like this or not, I don't know. I mean, it is bold,
Yeah.
and they must have known that this would spark a reaction of some kind.
Yeah.
This really feels like they are not just, like we talked about during the Nick Spencer run, touching the third rail. This is like the fourth rail.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is almost like playing with removing MJ from the game altogether, and like touching on One More Day was one thing, but like doubling down on One More Day is something else entirely. And I get why people are reacting to that in the way that they are. Some of it I think is like absolutely valid. I wouldn't say criticism, but a valid reaction to the meta around this book, which is to say,
Right.
like, your perceived feelings about what editorial wants and what the writer wants. And are those at war with each other? Are they in league with each other? Are they in league with what fans say they want? There's just a lot of feelings around this. And I think at the end of the day, Mark, I have landed on enjoying the story in the moment, and being open to where it takes us. I don't think killing Gwen was what the fans wanted, but like it has resulted in good stories, and good writers can make me care about whatever. And Wells has been a good writer thus far. But on this particular issue, this was the first time this storytelling mechanism, the mystery box reveal, didn't work for me, because this was a flashback inside of a flashback that's not driven by primary forward action and stakes and consequences we're learning about as it goes, in the way that the stuff with Peter has prior to this. And so this is the issue where I kind of was like, as much as I think there's some great comics and cartooning here, this was the one where I was like, it felt like they took their foot off the gas.
Yeah. I mean, look, we can talk about the outcomes and the emotional reactions or potential outcomes, all day. I mean, but like at the end of the day, I'm focused on the execution here. And if you could indulge me about in kind of comparing pop culture stuff for a second, like when I was in college, one of my favorite authors was Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club.
Yeah, I love
Among
him.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, the thing that always stood out to me about Fight Club the first time I both read it and then saw it, saw the movie, was like this idea of this whole thing being told by an unreliable narrator. Like the main character, he's many days without sleep. He's there's something not right there, and like the swerve of the unreliable narrator was very unique and exciting for me at the time. The thing is, the more Chuck Palahniuk that I read, I feel like he kept going back to that well, where a lot of his narrators were like these ne'er-do-wells, unreliable people. And like progressively, I got tired of that trope, if you will, in terms of storytelling. And I feel like, for me, like this is kind of, I feel like, frankly, like an unreliable narrator, because we're seeing things happen on a page, but it's still very incomplete. Like, we see outcomes without the execution into the why these outcomes are happening. And not having those whys, we haven't had the why for since issue 1 of this arc. And yeah, like I don't know if like this was the first time it didn't quote unquote work for me in terms of the mystery box, but I definitely felt the most tired from it by this point. Like I was just kind of like, all right, like it you got an issue to figure this out for me. You know what I mean? I'm not saying like you got to tell me everything, but like you got to fill in more holes than what you filled in here because it's still not there. You know, we're still playing with this subversion of fact here. And it's just I'm not gonna lie, I'm getting frustrated by it. This is a little it's starting to get too clever for its own good, in my opinion. I'd like to see, just some straightforward storytelling here. This is happening because this, and we could start talking specifically. What are the gaps? But yeah, why don't we start getting into some of the specific? I mean, is there anything else from an overall standpoint?
I wanted to talk about one more thing. And I agree with you, and I think that it's tricky to talk about that because like they're perceived gaps on our part, but they might not be. This might be the narrative. I would like to extend more credit to Wells and think these gaps are going to be filled in because in these gaps is the resolution, but that might not be. It's a lot to put on one issue. And boy, have we been burned before. And we've been burned from saying we've been burned before. Right. But, I do think it's worth us discussing now that the mystery box seems to be over, like how this was told. And having reread this whole run post this issue coming out, I really feel like I would have rather seen this play out in a linear fashion. I do think the downsides of this outweigh the upsides. The upside being, there's this real mystery, this desire to know what happens, and the idea that like there's a doomed inevitability that we know is sunk in that leads to tension. Right. If we know it's not going to work out, it's not Peter fighting for the status quo. It's Peter fighting in a way that we know he's going to lose. And that is interesting as almost like tragedy. You're watching it unfold. But I do think that cramming in this time jump stuff with MJ all into this issue kind of detaches the story a little bit from the main story. Like, imagine if we went straight from, the end of Beyond straight into this stuff, and MJ was trapped in another universe, and Peter, we see all this stuff playing out with Peter, that we've been seeing of him trying to get back to her, and we get little snippets of her life rapidly speeding up. In the meantime, while he's there, maybe every issue of this mini story we've been getting, we got a little bit more, a page or two of Mary Jane. That would have felt really terrifying, watching her move on with another person. And it's like the inevitability of that, to me, and then have her return, them apart, and knowing that Rabin is in the background and could come back at any moment. I just think there's so much tension to be mined there that we've largely like passed on for these layered flashbacks. And, maybe there was a reason schedule wise that it had to work out in the way that it did. But having reread it and reading, like even just the scene with that we criticize where Peter asks Black Cat out on a date and then falls over as if it's the first time he's ever asked a woman out. Rereading that in this context felt so different. Like, oh, he's finally getting over Mary Jane allowing himself to get back out there again. That's why he's sick. Not because he's worried about asking a woman out. It's because he's worried about, like, would he be able to move on? And yes, that was on the page there, but you didn't feel it the same way that you did reading the end of this issue. Like, the end of this issue is devastating. And so all of that context, like, really works to help out those issues 1 through 20 or whatever. So I cannot get behind. I don't begrudge them because it's a tough choice, but I cannot get behind the mystery box approach for this. I think it would have been so superior in the alternate route.
Yeah, I feel like I have been one of the biggest critics out there of the mystery box, even as someone who has mostly liked this run. But like, I can't disagree with a word that you just said there. I mean, it's like you said, it's a choice, and you know, like you can make presumptions why that was the choice. I don't. At the end of the day, I don't care. I want to like how
Yeah.
are we executing it? Like whatever. If Marvel needs to market how they need to market, and you know people can let their resentment speak for itself about that. But yeah, I mean like you know, and again, not to just like belabor points, but like you know what you said, like oh you know, are there gaps to fill? And I guess what I would argue with that is because of how this story has sequentially unfolded. If indeed we're overreading it or underreading it or whatever, and it is what it is, you know, a cigar is just a cigar. Then I feel like this is poorly executed storytelling because I feel like there because of you know, well, we're going to do this in this order and this here and this here. We haven't met in the middle yet. You know what I mean? Like we don't have all the facts, and if they're not going to give us the facts, and it's like no, the facts are what we told you. That's you know, Peter's with MJ's
Yeah.
with Paul. MJ's with Paul, and she's got kids, and that's more important to her right now. I mean, like I can fill in blanks in my head, but like they haven't given that to me, and I think that's a poor choice because like these these are long, you know, well MJ is a long-standing character, her relationship with Peter is a long-standing relationship. I need to understand why, like what moved the needle in this direction. They have not given us that. They have not. I mean, like, am I missing something? I mean, like, we're literally jumping weeks and months and seasons ahead in this story, and just seeing, you know, like a Rocky montage instead of storytelling here. You know, so like we don't know what actually happened with her and Paul. We just know kids show up, and now she's not leaving him. So
Yeah, and you know, I will say before we get into the specifics of MJ's story, like even if you don't like this storytelling, it is in no way an excuse for you to do what I've seen a lot of on the internet this week, which is like death threats and hate messages towards the entire Spider office, even all the way down to Marcio Menyz, who, as far as I can tell, is just a chill guy in Brazil doing amazing coloring work. You know, and I can't claim whether a book is misogynistic or not. Like, I don't feel like it's my place, you know, unless it's brutally obvious. But like digging up an old term like Scarlet Woman as some kind of evidence that Zeb Wells is a misogynist that hates women, and he wrote that into the book, into the mouth of the bad guy, I think is a stretch.
yeah,
You know, that term Scarlet Woman that we just all throw about all the time, you know, that one we're all familiar with. I mean, maybe I'll end up eating these words, and the next issue will kill MJ off in some really misogynistic ways where she's cut up in the fridge or whatever. But I just don't get that read from this. Like, there's also this commentary, and this is where we can get into MJ's story, like about her being saddled with children as a misogynistic thing, and I don't buy that either. Anyway, let's talk about MJ. Do you think that this comic did the work necessary to sell this turn of events for MJ? Specifically that, like, this is the direction we're taking this character. We're putting her through this, and this is the right choice for her. And I guess the real question is, could any comic justify taking MJ in this route? You know, putting her with another man. I have no inherent objection to that. But when you've got a character that's as long like lived as MJ and as established as Peter Parker's like firm love interest, can you do that within the pages of an issue?
No, I think that's a simple answer. No, this does not pull it off. Nor do I think in one issue, anybody can pull that off. I mean, with that said, I mean, like, you know, this, and again, this is such a hard comic to talk about because I'm still making the assumption that, you know, we don't have all the cards. We don't know
Right.
what's happening, and some of this is going to be revealed, if not all of it, in another issue. I don't know how they're going to fit it in, but like I feel like something's got to be addressed, because like for me, it's like we with MJ's story, you know, she goes from, you know, hoping on Peter's return, and, you know, desperately so, like refusing to move herself out of harm's way because she's so desperate to see Peter again, to this random appearance of baby food, then children, to all of a sudden moving on. And it's like, yes, if I, you know, look at this logically, having to take care of children is, you know, as we're both parents now, Dan, so we could speak to this. I mean, granted, there are biological children.
Yeah.
We are led to believe in this instance that they are not MJ's biological children, despite the fact that they look like her a little bit. But that's neither here nor there. But like, you know, taking care of a child is like one of the, like, it changes who you are as a person, and you know, realigns your priorities and realigns what you value most in life. So like that experience, that perspective is doing the work of this comic, but the comic itself is not doing the work. Like, you know what I mean? And like, so, and that's kind of been the biggest issue so far I've had with the storyline, which is like, we're taking our own projections and experiences, and both good and bad, you know, the fans who are complaining are taking their experiences and their projections about what they think editorial wants to do, or Zeb Wells personally, or whatever. But the fact is, we're taking our own personal experiences and projections and trying to fill in gaps in storytelling here. And only if you do that can you, in my opinion, make the assessment that this individual comic, sells this turn of events. If you remove the personal and the projection from it, it's a house of cards and it falls down, because there's not enough story there to actually sell what's happening. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm going to push back a bit because I think I was sold on it a little bit more than you were. You know, I do think that we watched that arc play out pretty well. I don't get the kind of magical, some people are saying like the kind of magical overnight change of mind for Mary Jane. You know, like we see the arc there, which is like they've held out for a while. She put all of her hope in Peter returning. You know, they've held out. They both gotten injured, so they're forced to move on. And as they're moving on, she's wondering like, where are you, Peter? She also, like, we don't know that she knows about the time dilation
Right.
in the way that it is. So, you know, she's waited a year, you know, it makes sense to me that she would have formed a new relationship with Paul, whatever manner of that relationship it is. It's at least one of partnership, of constantly fighting against the elements, which would bond anyone together. And then finding two children and choosing not to abandon them, you know, especially given MJ's history, you know, with, you know, abandoning what she feels is like her cardinal sin of abandoning Gail and her kids. You know, like that scene with Paul and MJ talking about the kids, I thought worked really well. Like, emotionally, I was there with her. Like, we can't leave these kids behind, you know? And to me, that's the thing is, like, as much as I'm, like, unclear on why this plot, why now, I think all the characters act very in character for who they are. Like, I buy that MJ would do all of this, you know, that she would bond with these kids. And I do think it's a perfectly well executed montage in the style of, like, even say like the opening of Up, where it makes you care about someone in 2 minutes before killing them off. Like, I understood this family unit to some degree. Now, there is some caginess around it, you know, and the specifics of like MJ and Paul's relationship, But I guess I thought like it was a really solid bit of cartooning. But could an issue ever convince me of Mary Jane changing her life overnight like that? No, because I don't think any Spider-Man comic has ever tried to change a major character so dramatically in this few pages. So
Right.
like I just have an inherent skepticism about it, despite the quality of cartooning on the page. At least that's my defense of it, as light as that defense might be.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I still think that even in your description of that, you're taking experience and projection and kind of coming to conclusions. Like, yeah, well, we didn't know, she didn't know that time moved differently, so I can see her moving on. Yeah, I can see her moving on, but we don't. I don't know. I don't feel the comic does the work, and it's because of the mechanism of how this story is being told. I don't think the comic does the work to show her actually moving on. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
sure.
Like
I
that.
mean, like
Yeah.
if this comic line ever needed an Amazing Mary Jane comic, it
Right.
was this. Like,
Right.
I would read 5 issues of Mary Jane and Paul bonding in another universe, fighting off giant rat symbols, with eagle guns. Great, give me that. Instead, we got Black Cat and Mary Jane fighting through limbo. Like,
Right.
give me that. But I think you and I can both guess the reason why we didn't get that, which is there's still another card to play, and really diving any deeper into this would reveal the like facade that is being put
Right.
over our eyes, or at least we're
Correct.
presuming it's being put over our eyes.
Right. Yeah. No, that's the thing, and it goes back to the initial criticism of this issue, which is the mystery box. Like we're
Right.
all roads go back to the mystery box. So yeah, it just so I mean, you might you sort of addressed this in what you were saying before, but like, what do you think is what is up with this very sharp shift that coincides exactly with the children appearing? I think either in a text to me or on Twitter or something you had said to the fact that like she nary mentions Peter's name again in this comic once the children show up. What do you think is happening here?
Well, I was kind of leaning into my theory that I think I discussed last episode about like the children being symbols in some way. I still think that that's accurate. Like there's an image with Rabin like talking about the chains on Mary Jane and drawing these two like symbols next to each other, and then the subsequent scene is MJ discovering the kids. There's been a lot of talk about that being a sort of misogynistic thing, but like if the kids are, I mean, last episode I discussed them as maybe like a symbolic projection of MJ's love for Peter. It could be that they are a projection of like MJ's own worst fears in regards to like Gale and all of that stuff, or just kid versions of Paul and MJ that they're made to care for, to slow them down, or whatever it is, or like a projection of domesticity, which, if you remember early MJ, that was like one of her fears, is like getting settled down and finding herself in the same position that her sister Gail was put in. But I do think like the book wants us to make that connection, loosely. Like, I don't think they want us to get too far ahead on it. They want us to think they're real, but I think the implication is there that there's whatever Rabin is drawing in the sand has conjured forth these kids in some way. Is that your read, Mark?
Um, Maybe. I mean, I mean, no. I mean, like certainly it don't make much sense for just kids to appear out of thin air. And there was no. I mean, besides Paul, there was. I mean, and that's the other mystery that all goes back here is like who is the other, like, how did you get here person and all this? It's Paul. So like what is being created here, and what does it mean? And Paul doesn't have medical records, so there's your red flag right there as well. I, that that theory about Rabin creating it is as good as, or Wyatt, or I mean, like it all tracks, but we don't know. And I'm not trying to play the I don't want to speculate, but like, it, I also feel like I'm always wrong. I feel one way or another when it comes to trying to predict what is actually happening in some of these comics. But I feel like I'm really wrong when it comes to these Zeb Wells comics right now. So I will just say, yeah, that makes sense, but we'll see.
I'm less interested in the of course I am interested in the what are they, who are they, that whole thing, but I'm counting on finding out next issue. I just think that's what 26's big reveal is like, who is Paul and these kids, and
Right.
like what has Mary Jane been keeping secret about them in some regard, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm more interested right now in like thematically, like who are these people, because like the question is why do it in this manner? Like what is it about like Wyatt and Rabin and all of this that like that Zeb Wells is writing about?
Yeah.
It seems pretty random, but also with great design, so that there was care behind it. And like the things that I think about thematically are like what it feels like to move on from someone else and then reconnect with them later. We had talked about like the kind of like meeting up with your ex somewhere down the line, and like how the relationship isn't always mutually split off, but that's something I'm always keeping in the back of my mind, is like, what does Zeb want to say about these characters to put them through all this? And right now I'm not able to connect that entirely in a satisfying way, and I'm hoping that 26 does, and it doesn't just end up being like, well, we put them through a gauntlet because we wanted to put them through a gauntlet. And so far I think Zeb Wells has done a great job of actually having thematic statements at the heart of most of his stories. So I'm hoping for the same here, but like it's hard to really say one way or the other, because right now it does feel very loose and kind of random.
Right. Let's talk about MJ and Paul and whatever this relationship is, because we as I alluded to numerous times in my recap. I mean, we've heard everything from Peter the cuck to MJ has left Peter for Paul, look, say what you will. I mean, there is clearly a bond there between these two characters, but like we never witness on the page actual intimacy here, and we see like them staring at each other. We see like silhouettes of them kind of close to each other, but they're never physically touching. They're never holding hands. They're never kissing. They're never holding each other. MJ hugs Owen. Like that's a moment of intimacy, if you will, not like romantic intimacy, but physical intimacy. But like, to me, again, it's a red flag about not only just the presumptions of the angry internet mob, but also just like what are we actually witnessing here between these two characters? I mean, do you feel that's an accurate read, or did you get something more potent out of this relationship than I did?
Well, I mean, it's hard to prove a negative, like when the text is trying to convince you that they are together or they have like a meet cute, but it's the details in between that seem sketchy. Like they're building the device together, and they have like the kind of like quintessential meet cute where someone's hand slips and touches the other one's hand, but we don't see the resolution of the scene. Like they get cut off, right? Like they're like MJ and then we move on. Now that could be like a MJ I am falling for you, or like MJ I need to tell you something, or I'm gay, or whatever,
Right.
Like there's so many different ways that could go. And then then we get like Paul in bed, looking very sad with MJ in silhouette in the doorway, and he says like, "I should have told you." ... And of course, like the worst people on the internet are like, "Oh, like the dickless Paul, like he's a, he's whatever, like." But there's something there. There's some secret that he, whether it's that he's gay or he isn't a real person or he knew about the time dilation and didn't tell her. Like there's so many things. Maybe he was like the nature of Rabin's relationship with him was that they were once lovers. I mean, there's so many things. It's an infinite number of possibilities. But for me, the key image that doesn't sell me on their relationship is at the bottom of that same page, where they're both laying on the ground in like fall with each other and staring at each other, and they both have these very blank faces, and as if there's no connection there at all, like, or there's like a distance. They're on opposite sides of the panel from each other. It's very look, if you wanted to tell me that these two were a loving couple, you would replace that image with them laying together on a blanket with their arms around each other or kissing or anything. But to me, that silent image just speaks so much volumes that this is not as it's presented. And sometimes we should just read the images. Like Kaare Andrews and John Romita Jr. are masters at their craft. If they're trying to communicate something, they're going to communicate it very plainly. But the writer is letting them kind of like silently do it and maybe testing how good of readers we are. I don't know if anything that I'm saying is how you read it, Mark, because like it definitely took me multiple reads to go, wait a minute, what is really happening here?
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, yeah, I mean, those are all good moments to point out. I mean, the other moment, I mean, was right towards the very, very end, and that very devastating scene with with Peter and MJ, where he goes, "You and Paul," and her response is, "Yes, me and Paul, period, and Romy and Owen." And it's, I don't know, like, maybe this is an overread, but like, everything has seemed so intentional in this comic to this point. Like why not just be like, yeah, we're together, like,
or I love him, like,
yeah.
You could be so much more specific. And it's the kind of thing too, like where if you're a comic writer and you don't want to box in Mary Jane to be in this comic relationship forever, you leave like a back door for someone to come and be like, no, she never said she loved him. But like, that does not seem like Wells would build in a backdoor in this way. Like he's just been so intentional in everything that he's done. Even the issues we haven't loved, like he was taking a swing and going a direction and we maybe didn't like it. This is definitely a swing. And I just don't get the sense that he would play this loosely with the pieces in this way. So yeah, that's a really important moment. And I'll use it to point out in Amazing Spider-Man #7 on my reread, there's a moment where Peter apologizes to MJ when they bump into each other at Oscorp about how he's been acting, presumably that he's been calling her, stalking her, whatever. And she says, quote, "To tell you the truth, ... end quote." And then Paul cuts her off. And she's about to say something, like whether it be like, it's actually nice to see you again or whatever, they would become more warm to each other in that dark web issue. But like, it's set up as if there's some tension or mystery that we're not getting about the nature of her, Paul, and her family. Later Peter suggests MJ loves Paul in the issue 9 in the Hellfire Gala issue. And she, again, doesn't confirm it. Like she just didn't hear in this issue. She just says, "Damn it, Peter, this isn't about you. It's about responsibility." And that doesn't sound like the answer from someone who's legitimately in love with this other person. So I'm not convinced that there is a romantic relationship here.
Right. I mean, is there like I said earlier, is there a bond? I mean, that seems to be true, but
Yeah.
what is a bond? I mean, like, Dan, you and I are bonded, but we're not romantically involved, despite what maybe some people on Twitter might think. I don't know.
Or our wives.
Or our wives. Yeah, this, I'm not getting more clarity from this conversation so far, Dan. Do we want to take a quick break and talk about the Slack?
Sure, go ahead, Mark.
Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join. You can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what has been going on in the Slack this week?
Well, Mark, this week, as all weeks, has been awesome in the Slack. But I think we broke our all-time record, which, based on the conversation, Mark, you and I have been having, probably makes sense. The spoiler thread just for this issue crested over 900 comments in just a couple days. If you want to read a small novel about this issue of people just going, what are we actually seeing here? What did we think about this issue? Our big joke was, can we get more comments on that thread than there are issues of Amazing Spider-Man? And we've just about done it, or maybe by now we already have had done it. But here's the real kicker, Mark. Guess what? All of them were respectful, calm, and fun, no matter how we felt about it. You loved it, you hated it. That's the great thing about the fact. I know for a fact nowhere else on the internet is offering that. So if you're looking for a place to have a calm peace of mind, like it, hate it, whatever, come join the fun in the Slack. It's amazing. It's Spider. It's Slack. It's the Amazing Spider Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that will let you sign up in less than a minute. We hope to see you there. It's probably the healthiest Spider-Man community on the internet. So at least until next issue. So yeah. We'll see. So come join us in the Slack.
All right. And just thinking about having to read through 900 comments. I mean, I know I've been on the Slack more than I have been in the past, Dan, but woof, that's a lot of comments to read through, especially 900 comments of speculation. Like, my brain, everything's on fire. No.
Well, let's talk about the ending of this issue, which gets us back to John Romita Jr.'s artwork. And, I thought that transition was handled pretty well. I know some people had a beef about the reprinting of pages, but as Nick Lowe pointed out, actually in response to an email from one of our listeners who emailed him and got a response from him, in terms of page count, those pages were kind of free given the cost of the issue. They threw them in there and didn't charge extra for them. I mean, whether you liked it as a storytelling thing, I thought it bridged the gap pretty well. I don't know how you feel about it, Mark, but having MJ's kind of narration over that brought me back into John Romita Jr.'s art, and I thought a pretty artful way.
Yeah, no, I honestly, I didn't mind it all that much in terms of the artwork. I mean, it was a little repetitive, but I didn't realize they were quote unquote free comics. So I guess that works. This ending though, I mean, like it's utterly devastating. And like you said, like this is to be perceived as a major loss for Peter, on the level of, Gwen getting thrown off a bridge and, or Uncle Ben dying. I mean, like, this is like, he's broken at the end of this. And not only is he broken, the consequences that were, pretty clear since the beginning of this run. I mean, like, we now understand the full extent of the consequences with his friends and family. And which is frankly part of the reason why, like, people jump into the conclusion that MJ is going to die in this next comic, which, I mean, is a possibility. I'm not dismissing it, but it's like, hey, like, Peter's already at his lowest point here, like, I mean, like, if they're going to go, if they're going to do something like that, I mean, like, we're going to go subterranean here. So, but, this, I'm assuming it impacted you as much. I mean, you said as much earlier in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard for me to think of many Spider-Man comics with an ending as devastating as this. Um, I think it already packed a punch. I think it could have packed even more of a punch if it played out in like real time. I don't know how much we would have believed it necessarily. And maybe that's the advantage of doing this out of order, is that like we know, oh no, this actually sticks. Like this isn't just some cliffhanger ending. Like this is a for real status quo, for a while for this character. Whether that's undone in 26 is beyond my ability to prognosticate, but it felt painful here. And I can't imagine, what it would have felt like reading it if this was told linearly. But like even then, like I think there's very clear, not only like thematic similarities to Amazing Fantasy 15's ending and the feeling of loss, but also visual similarities. There's an image at the end of Peter crouched over with the kind of railings of, I'm guessing it's like Central Park or something, like angled towards him with these two globes of light over him. And I think the parallel to the ending, the final panel of Amazing Fantasy 15, with the angled buildings of New York pointing towards him and the lone moon hanging over his head. Like I tweeted about this, and I'm sure Alex will put an image of it in the video version. But as soon as I read the page, I was like, Amazing Fantasy 15. And it was a real gut punch, that line, I wasn't fast enough. Like you can feel it. And then him like provoking a fight with the Fantastic Four and suggesting like, I want someone to hit me back. Like give me more pain, oh man, it felt very in character for Peter to want to kind of like feel the heapings of pain on him. But yeah, I just thought it was a really powerful ending to this comic.
Yeah, and like so much of these last few issues, like you reiterated about kind of going back and rereading. I mean, like it makes the before while you were still on paternity leave, Al and I were talking about depressed Peter and like what a turn of events that was from a storytelling standpoint. But like now, it makes those issues all the more poignant, and frankly makes them make more sense. Like not that I made the assumption, oh wow, like whatever he did, whatever happened was really bad. Well, now we know. Yeah, the I wasn't fast enough. I mean, like for whatever reason, my brain went immediately to. I know the visuals were Amazing Fantasy 15, but that line made me go to Gwen Stacy's death. I just felt like like he did everything in his power, and it wasn't good enough. Which is like for Peter, like with great power must also come great responsibility. Except he still couldn't do it. You know what I mean? Like he did it. So I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, we'll see. Like you said,
that's the thing to me. But it is a tough pill to swallow, and I know they're like teasing some big death next issue, and there's that Marvel comic we haven't seen the cover of called Fallen Friend that has red font on it, and it comes out the same, or the text for it is going to be revealed the same day as the release of the next issue. So like they really are leaning into telling us that MJ is going to die. And even the darkest issues of Spider-Man, I feel like there is a bright spot in them, Maybe not the night Gwen Stacy died, although I think the kind of moment at the end with MJ where she comes back to console him is a sort of like, I don't know if I would call it a bright spot, but it is an idea that like healing will occur, Yeah. And to me, like you said, this feels like the lowest point. Killing off MJ just feels like, I mean, maybe it'll be done really artfully if it is done. Like it feels like absolute misery. So I don't know if I buy it. yet that that's the direction they're going to go, but we're going to find out.
I mean, again, like you said, we gotta. I reserve judgment until I see the execution of it, but like, I I have a hard time seeing this comic after this in light of this moment. I have a hard time seeing this comic coming back tonally to a place of enjoyment if that's the direction they want to go. I gotta we'll reserve final judgment until we see how it goes. But for that reason alone, I don't I don't buy that per se. I mean, it's still the realm of possibilities. I have noticed in the Slack all the speculation about Fallen Friend, and it could very well be Spider-Man related. I doesn't necessarily like not. This is going to come across sounding in bad form, but like, does Mary Jane's death necessitate its own miniseries following it? I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, this is not like Ultimate Peter dying and having, ultimate fallout. Yeah, it doesn't. I don't know. Like, we have to see. Like, it's.
Well, I mean, The Fallen Friend is a one shot, but today,
Okay.
and again, not to get solicity, today a solicit released for a classified 4-issue series that has red font and will not be revealed. So, like, I mean, honestly, if I had to put my money down, like, I think we get MJ becomes a superhero, jackpot, and she's got that device, and we've got the triple skulls here, and there's some consequence with that, but becomes her origin story, and they want to make MJ a superhero. Like, I mean, that might be cynical in its own way, but like, if I had to put money down, I don't think I don't think her death is like we're gonna get a flat death of MJ, a la Gwen Stacy coming up. And look, I'll be willing to eat another shoe, the other pair in the shoes that I promised Dan Slott I'd eat, if Spider Boy didn't turn out to be the spider that bit Peterman or Peter with that became Spider-Man, becoming a human boy. Anyway, that's all the way down the Twitter rabbit hole. But speculations aside, like, this is a miserable end of this comic in a way that I think is very fitting for Spider-Man
Right.
comics. Like, I don't feel bad about this at all. Like, this is part of the arc of Peter, and the question is, we're watching him pick himself back up, try to dating again, trying to rebuild his relationship with Aunt May. We're kind of already seeing the upswing here. What's it going to be like to go from pain to more pain without, like, we're going to read this time jump in the pages, right? We're going to go back to the future, even more to the future, to this confrontation with Rabin. Is it wrong to have done this non-linearly so that whatever tragedy is going to befall them in 26 happens immediately after this tragedy? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. What do you think about the art here? Obviously, this is split in half by Kaare Andrews and JRJR. What do you think of Kaare Andrews' art? Famously of Spider-Man Reign, a book I really like and really like the art for, and you've historically not been a fan of. But I'm not really sure that we talked much about the art there, so to speak.
Yeah, so to me, it's a mixed bag. I mean, like, there was some very stylized and 90s-esque stuff throughout this comic that I enjoyed. But I do I mean, I gotta put this out there, and not to echo some of the mouthiest critics of this comic book right now, but like, some of that art with buff MJ and Paul was just absurd to me. It made no sense. Like, I mean, and the fact that when they came back to, I don't want to say Earth, but the main timeline or whatever, like, they reverted back to being normal proportioned humans. It took me out of it. There were several panels in that story that just took me way out because of how crazy the art was in it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, like there is an image where they're building that device where Paul just looks like the most roided up man on planet Earth.
Yeah.
In which case I would totally get why MJ would have moved on. Like the dude is huge. But yeah, especially given the Paul that we know is kind of like this kind of skinny scientist guy. I mean, I get that they would bulk up when they were living like Rambo, and maybe get thinner again when they felt safe. But it is hyper stylized. I like Kaare Andrews cartooning a lot. Like I think he creates really great layouts and emotional pages, and he knows how to really tell a story on the page. I love the little details, like the Spider-Man costume that's around MJ's arm, meaning that she's still kind of holding out for hope for Peter. But you're right; it is silly in many ways, almost like a fantasy of some sort. So I was very happy to see JR come back for the end, where I thought he was really in his best form. The MJ and Peter in the hospital, I've seen criticized online. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. This is such a wonderfully understated scene of these two people being a bit emotionally guarded around each other. I thought it was really quietly devastating. How about you?
Yeah. Oh no, I liked the. I hate to be this way, but like the return to JR was probably my favorite part visually of the comic. I mean, like, yeah, I there were some fun bits earlier, but like, yeah, it's just too much that was taking me out of it. Even the repetitive bits. Although there was one flashback of a flashback of Peter punching Paul. And in the original scene, I mentioned this in the recap, and I know you've talked a bunch about this already. It was Paul punching Peter. Say that 3 times fast. What do you think that was? Is that a mistake, or is this more intentionality? Anything from the rumor mill from you on that?
Well, it's been a big speculation on the Slack. I don't think it's a mistake, if only because JR is homaging himself.
Right.
Like he would have to have gone back to that original image and chosen to replicate it in some way. So, and it's weird because the style of their dress flips. Like in one, Peter is very casual and and like falling apart, and Paul is dressed up in the original, and in this one it's Peter like dressed up, like looking nice, and Paul looking like a slob. So it is really weird. I'm trying not to overread it. Like if I were just reading it on the page as I did, to me it suggested that there were multiple altercations between Peter and Paul during this 6-month time, of Peter stalking MJ. And the original one, like Paul is shouting enough, and the suggestion there being like that Peter has done this multiple times. So it could just be that, it's a suggestion of, we know Peter's kind of stalking MJ and isn't able to really let it go in his depression. And that Paul and Peter got into it several times before. But it is still so weird to choose to do that because it's unclear from a storytelling perspective. And that MJ goes from kind of being defensive of like Paul to defensive of Peter in the different situations, which maybe is worth noting that her like allegiance isn't 100% clear. I don't know, Mark. Do you think it's worth rumor milling about this?
You're asking me if I want a rumor mill? Have you learned nothing in 10 years, Dan? I mean,
you brought it up. I mean, it is odd. It is odd.
I don't think it's a mistake. What it means and whether or not we'll get answers, that I don't have. That I'm not going to guess, but I don't think it's a mistake. That's all I'll say about it. So
yeah.
So just as a quick final button on this before we get to grades, I wanted to ask you, we talked a lot about, obviously, in our intro, the mystery box and the effectiveness of it. But like, when you got your sneak peek at this comic, the first thing you texted, well, the second thing you texted me, the first thing you texted me was like, wow, the internet's going to be angry, but they've been also so wrong about so much in this comic. And I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But you referred to this comic as Schrodinger's comic.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, do you want to first define who Schrodinger is for those who are not like super nerds, or I think there's a Big Bang Theory episode.
Schrodinger, a scientist, I think like associated with like quantum theory.
Yes.
The idea that like he puts his cat in a box, and when he opens the box, or before he opens the box, the cat is both simultaneously dead and alive, because he doesn't know like the fate of the cat. And when you open the box is when you find out whether it's dead or alive.
Right.
To me, reading this issue, I felt like this issue could very well have been where all of the wheels fell off the cart, or the cat was discovered to be dead. But we don't know. Like, the cat may have died in this issue, but we won't know until the next issue. Which is to say, like, I think there's a lot of good stuff in this issue. But I'm beginning. This is the first time I've really questioned whether or not this was like worth it. And I said all along, like, I was going to wait for this story to play out to really like see whether it was worth it. And here I got super nervous because we got one short comic left to wrap all this up. And man, are there a lot of dangling questions. And boy, have we been in this situation before. I won't say whether I feel like the cat is dead or alive, because I truly don't know. But it's really going to come down to opening that box next issue and finding out.
Okay. Do we want to give it a grade? You want me to go first?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, we'll skip over the backup. I think we've been talking long enough. It was a fine backup story. I felt a little tone deaf editorially to include it in this particular issue.
But maybe intentionally so. I mean,
maybe
that could be the hope spot you're looking for. But anyway, I'm just saying. All right, I'm gonna give this comic a C+.
That's funny. That's exactly what I was gonna give it.
All right, we should. You're just saying that because I said it. I mean, look, I enjoyed this comic. But yeah, there are so many questions, and like you, it's like, is the cat dead or alive? And I don't know. And if this cat is indeed dead, like I can't in good conscience give it higher than that. You know what I mean? Like, I would love to read 26 and be like, that was an A, and this arc is an all-timer. But like, I think probably the last time I was in this scenario was Superior 30. And I was quite high on it, and you weren't, because I wasn't seeing the Schrodinger's cat of it all, in my opinion. Because I was like, no, this is all, trust me, like, next issue, it's going to just make it all make sense. And I was like, oh, wait, no, it didn't. Okay. So fool me once. And I'm not saying I'm expecting to be, proven wrong here, but anyway, that's
I mean,
my
here's the thing. I remember issues 4 and 5 of this run, and boy, did they pull a trickaroo on me and prove Zeb was really in control this whole time. And we got a JRJR issue coming up next. Like, all of that artistic combination to me has been nothing but like absolute fire,
Yeah.
And
I do want to say, you use the expression Zeb Wells was in control, and I know you meant just in terms of telling a story. I want to put out there, I don't know why I feel obligated to say this, but like, I am of firm belief that Zeb Wells is driving this car all the way to the finish right now. I do not feel like that there is anything about these last 5 issues and the 6th to come that is being driven by editorial or other outside factors. Like, Zeb is telling the story he wants to tell. Like, so this is all on him, in my opinion. I just want to, like, do you share in that, or do you feel that?
I do not feel the hand of editorial on this comic. I can't really articulate why, like, because like, I think if I divorce myself in terms of One More Day of like where I knew that comic was going before it came out, that would not have felt necessarily editorially driven until maybe the final issue of it.
Right.
Because it did feel, until the appearance of Mephisto, I think, as like a magical MacGuffin, it did feel like a logical conclusion for where that story was going, given the death of Aunt May and Peter's desperation and all of that stuff. And even still, like, I know we have a bit controversial opinions on One More Day, which is like, I think it's a good story with no ending. Like, it's a story that's waiting for a redemptive arc. And I really thought Nick Spencer's was going to be that after all the years. And before that, Omit and so on. Like, so I don't know. Like, but I don't. It feels so weird after Nick Spencer's run that, like, to say that editorial would want to break these two up forever after doing that run. But maybe this is the only way they feel they can dodge the engagement ring of it all. Like, we introduced the engagement ring, so like, how do we get ourselves out of that pickle? We got to get rid of MJ forever. To me, that's just a weird choice to allow that to happen, to then have to double down this way. So like, I don't feel, for whatever reason, I agree with you. I don't feel like editorial is being like, Zeb, you must do X, Y, and Z with these characters. But maybe it's also because I haven't accepted that in my head that I truly believe that that's where we're going. Like there's a part of me that thinks I'm going to open the next issue and read it and go, wait a minute, they were actually doing this the whole time.
Right. Well, look, like, even if happens, I like, to me, I feel like Zeb's telling this story. Nothing about how this story has unfurled, for better and for worse, feels like it's being inorganically forced. Like, this story is being told at a pace that a writer wants to tell it. Like, it's just I feel it in my guts and bones. I don't, maybe like you, I can't put my finger exactly on it, but like, I don't know. It just, that's not to say I'm going to like it or that I feel it's going to be earned, but like to me, like, I think for the first time in a while, and I know, like, I'm sometimes the biggest devil's advocate when it comes to the Nick Spencer run about editorial. Well, we haven't heard confirmation, but like, there were things about that felt like things were being forced, and maybe not necessarily willingly on Nick Spencer, not necessarily, MJ and Peter related. It just in terms of the pacing and how things were unfurling. I don't get that sense here. I think like Zeb is telling his story. So
if there's anything that feels forced, it feels editorially forced from an art perspective, which is to say we need to juggle this book around JRJR's availability. Would I have liked more issues filling in the gap, like of the 6 months, and Peter fighting Paul and blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff I would have loved to have seen more of on the page, and maybe we'll get it in 26. But like, the thing that I think has made this uneven, if anything, in the run, or maybe it's been paced in the way that it has, is I think they're trying to give JR the ability to draw the big moments of this story. And so they're pacing it accordingly. And that gets down to the twice shipping thing, which again, I think is even above Nick Lowe's pay grade. Like, I think that's just the place that ASM is at now, because it's such an important book in the Marvel lineup in terms of making money and making comics profitable. So, like, to me, that's the only thing that feels artificial here. And for the most part, like, they pulled it off. JRJR's implementation here has been wonderful.
But people will buy it no matter what, Dan. Anyway.
Okay, so C+ from both of us. No surprise we agree on something, which is to say, like, I'm not sure how I feel about this comic, but I enjoyed a lot of elements of it.
Ditto.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dan, on that note, it's that time. Time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. So a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do. Plus, we wanted to issue a special thank you and welcome our newest patrons, Patrick Claren, Cowboy Lansky, and Will Hohenstein. And a special thanks to Jeff Markovich for upping his membership tier. And I'll say, for sending me a comic in the mail. Thank you, Jeff. That was very kind of you.
Oh, yeah? Was it the -1 issue that you were missing, or no?
No. It was the free Comic Book Day Spider-Man 2 Gamerverse issue that nobody could find. So
that's a hot comic. So
it is, yeah. That was very kind of Jeff.
You could use that to trade in for a -1 Amazing Spider-Man, for sure.
Never, Mark. Never.
Okay. Well, also to download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like Jan DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, and many, many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, until we find 2 kids in your backyard shed and raise them to take over this podcast from us, what's our motto?
I mean, are we going to find like a thing of baby food first before they show up, or
is that how you lured them in there, Mark?
Yes. Let's get the internet on me luring children into a place now, Dan. That's perfect. I will say, with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk
and plausible deniability.
It wasn't me.
Don't miss the next installment.